Chapter 7, Part 3. And so, back to Belsen and how we got where we are today. Ernie and I continued to work for the DPC and the Red Cross, but by the late 1940s the British were descaling the operation. They wanted out, in short. The Red Cross had other priorities, and the sick were being moved on and treated elsewhere. It was only ever going to be a temporary hospital facility, but it lasted longer than most expected. The DPC was the same. By the end of the decade, those in charge could not justify keeping the facility open. Of course, records were kept and filed, and copies distributed to the relevant offices and libraries, should anyone wish to access them. The general mood was, if people haven't been found now, they never will be. And so the place was closed before the end of 1950. We still had time, but we needed to think about what to do next. For many of us, it was a case of what to do next. It was frightening and unsettling. Personally, I had not given the future a great deal of thought. I was living in the present. It all took me by surprise. I was very much alone. I was soon to be jobless and homeless, with nobody to turn to, other than my friend Ernie. And one evening, in front of a log fire at the Red Cross barracks, we discussed what might happen. Ernie revealed that he'd already been thinking a great deal about the future and what might happen to us all. To my surprise, he told me he'd been thinking about my own situation and had been planning what we could do together. Together? Typically, he was thinking of others before himself. I felt reassured, wanted, safe even. I wasn't alone. I had my trusted friend Ernie. That said, I wasn't prepared for what he had planned. Daniel continued. By this point I was absolutely riveted. At the time the camp at Belsen was liberated, two of the survivors were twin sisters. At some point, earlier, during the war, they'd been separated from their parents and eventually found themselves in Belsen. They were only 8 years old in 1945, malnourished, suffering from dysentery and riddled with lice. How they pulled through was a testament to the human spirit and their togetherness. They spent a long time in the hospital, months. On a few occasions they were both expected to give up the fight, but we all underestimated them. They fought on and somehow recovered. And their fight became a symbol of the fight for survival. They were inseparable too. When they were strong enough, they helped in and around the hospital and lived on the site. Both girls were shy and quite insular, which is totally understandable considering what they'd been through. They were called Annabella and Rebecca Kaplan. At some point they left the hospital and moved into what I can only guess was a type of foster care facility for younger children who had no known family, and that must have been early 1946. We didn't hear from them again until they visited the DPC together in 1948 to try and find out what happened to their family. And thankfully, for them, they spoke to Ernie. In his spare time he'd been working on requests for information, and Ernie took it upon himself to help by searching the records he had access to. He found only one reference for them, probably the worst, that both parents were on the register for passengers boarding a train to Poland and Auschwitz. It was fair to assume that they did not survive much longer after that. As I said before, but we all clung to hope, and the twins were no exception, but they were at a loss as to what they could do. But of course, Ernie felt he could do more. He felt it was too early to draw a line under query, despite the lack of information. He asked the girls to leave it with him, and he would get back in touch with them within a week. At this time they were staying in a town called Celle, to the south of Bergen, with a kindly German couple who had taken them under their wing after their recovery. They were happy there, and they had great affection for this couple, but the desire to find out what had happened to their own parents was strong. But Ernie was true to his word. He took it upon himself to travel all the way across Germany and Poland to visit Auschwitz to check the paperwork there. Even then this was a perilous journey, for a young Brit, though with his Red Cross badge and accreditation, he managed to cut through a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. The site was very different then to the memorial it is today. Ernie passed through countless security checks and border patrols and administrative obstacles before he found what he was looking for. Among the mountains of paperwork, he found their parents. They had both arrived at the camp in August 1943 and managed to avoid the finger to the left, otherwise known as the death line, where people were sent to the ovens as soon as they stepped off the train. The parents had been split up from each other. At this point, those chosen for work duty were sent to another area of the camp. Women and men were all assigned work duties, but were housed in separate barracks. For many, it was as bad as hell itself, and thousands met their end this way. But not the Kaplans. They spent a few months in Auschwitz, then for some reason they were transferred to Flossenbürg in the southeast of Germany, with only a dozen others. It was unusual for them to have been transferred as a couple, and Ernie could not find any reason for this in the paperwork. Rumour would suggest they may have offered bribes to guards, but none of this could be substantiated. Ernie continued the search and travelled the long journey east through Poland and Czechoslovakia as it was then, on his mission to find out what happened to them. Flossenbürg, like many camps, had been initially designed for just a few thousand, but as the years went by and the numbers of prisoners grew, it was expanded to accommodate more workers. Ploughing through the paperwork, he managed to find them again. They survived the end of the war, and the camp was liberated by the Americans in April 1945. The fact that it was the Americans who had liberated the camp proved to be very significant. As part of the whole issue of resettlement, the Americans offered sanctuary to hundreds of Jewish people. The Kaplans were two of the lucky ones. From what Ernie managed to find out, the pair had boarded a ship for New York in August 1945, but the paper trail ended there. He returned to the DPC with the news, and we met the girls to explain what he had found out. Needless to say, they were ecstatic. Their optimism had been rewarded, well, thanks to Ernie. There were still no guarantees of a happy ending, but the chances were good. Very good. Understandably, the twins wanted to leave and find their parents as soon as possible, if it was possible, but it wasn't that easy. We recognised we would have to formulate a plan, but Ernie had already considered much of this on his return journey, and it was quite some plan for us all. Life-changing, in fact, if we pulled it off.